We're going to go back in time, folks, to a simpler world on October 6th when World War III was only brewing on one burner, the Ukraine-Russia burner. China, if you count China, but that's kind of been a slow simmer for years, right? It was really, I mean, the burner was at a 10 for Russia, Ukraine. And here, Time Magazine put out this report on Volodymyr Zelensky. The headline, "Nobody believes in our victory like I do." Inside Volodymyr Zelensky's struggle to keep Ukraine in the fight. This was a long piece. We are not going to read anywhere near the whole thing, but we will read enough to give you an idea. Volodymyr Zelensky was running late. The invitation to his speech at the National Archives in Washington had gone out to several hundred guests, including congressional leaders and top officials from the Biden administration. Billed as the main event of his visit in late September, it would give him a chance to inspire U.S. support against Russia with the kind of oratory the world has come to expect from Ukraine's wartime president. It did not go as planned. That afternoon, Zelensky's meetings at the White House and the Pentagon delayed him by more than an hour. And when he finally arrived to begin his speech at 6:41 p.m., he looked distant and agitated. Yeah, the meeting did not go well. Here's some leaked audio from that meeting.
What I want you to explain is the logic behind what you're doing.
Not good. That's
well,
Joe Biden.
we also have audio from his departure.
Go home and get your fucking shine box.
Yeah, no, it's not good. Not a good meeting. Not a good meeting. We only have those two snippets that we can play for you. Those are only what we can confirm. Everything else we're gonna have to rely
a mole
on Time Magazine. Yeah, exactly. An incompetent mole who only got those couple of snippets there. He relied on his wife, First Lady Olena Zelenska, to carry his message of resilience on the stage behind him, while his own delivery felt stilted, as though he wanted to get it over with. At one point, while handing out medals after the speech, he urged the organizer to hurry things along. The reason, he later said, was the exhaustion he felt that night, not only from the demands of leadership during the war, but also the persistent need to convince his allies that with their help, Ukraine can win. "Nobody believes in our victory like I do. Nobody," Zelensky told Time in an interview after his trip. Instilling that belief in his allies, he said, "takes all your power, your energy. You understand? It takes so much of everything." Oh, if only he knew. If only he knew. No one ever believed in your ability to win. It is only getting harder. 20 months into the war, about a fifth of Ukraine's territory remains under Russian occupation. Tens of thousands of soldiers and civilians have been killed, and Zelensky can feel during his travels that global interest in the war has slackened. So has the level of international support. The scariest thing is that part of the world got used to the war in Ukraine, he says. Exhaustion with the war rolls along like a wave. You see it in the United States, in Europe, and we see that as soon as they start to get a little tired, it becomes like a show to them. I can't watch this rerun for the 10th time. Public support for aid to Ukraine has been in decline for months in the U.S., and Zelensky's visit did nothing to revive it. Now it's down to 41% from 48% a couple months back. So some 41% of Americans want Congress to provide more weapons to Kyiv, down from 65% in June. When Ukraine began a major counteroffensive, according to Reuters' survey taken shortly after Zelensky's departure. That offensive has proceeded at an excruciating pace and with enormous losses, making it ever more difficult for Zelensky to convince partners that victory is around the corner. With the outbreak of war in Israel, even keeping the world's attention on Ukraine has become a major challenge. After his visit to Washington, Time followed the president and his team back to Kyiv, hoping to understand how they would react to the signals they had received, especially the insistent calls for Zelensky to fight corruption inside his own government and the fading enthusiasm for a war with no end in sight. On my first day in Kyiv, I asked one member of his circle how the president was feeling. The response came without a second's hesitation: angry. Last slide. The usual sparkle of his optimism, his sense of humor, his tendency to liven up a meeting in the war room with a bit of banter or a bawdy joke, none of that has survived into the second year of all-out war. Now he walks in, gets the updates, gives the orders, and walks out, says one longtime member of his team. Another tells me that most of all, Zelensky feels betrayed by his Western allies. Oh, that's nice. We've only given him, what, $120 billion? Yeah. They have left him without the means to win the war. Wow. Only the means to survive it.
That's how fast it takes for a guy to get whacked.
Yeah, exactly.
They found a new toy.
They found a new toy, right? They got a new war in Israel that they think they can actually win, as horrific as that is.
And also, I can't remember the exact quote, but they talked about the corruption there, and their source said we're stealing hand over fist or something. I can't remember the exact phrase. I got to say, if you're somebody who gets your information from alternative media, this is one of those moments where it just gets so frustrating that the shit we said 2 years ago is now everyone can say it, right?
Right.
It's just again and again and again and again. We're out ahead of this stuff by a year, 2 years. And then finally, all of the outlets that fought us, that called us Putin puppets, all of a sudden, for whatever reason, there's some shift in the situation and it becomes acceptable for them to tell the truth. And all of a sudden, everything that we got called, Russian puppets for is all in that article. Everything that the alternative media, that Gray Zone, that Cy Hirsch, that all these people have been saying for 2 years, all of a sudden now it's in time.
Yeah, no, that was my exact take on this as well. My exact response is that now, 1 year, 10 months, and a few 100,000 corpses later, it is okay to tell the obvious truth, which was obvious from minute one, whether you knew anything about Russia and Ukraine or Eastern European geopolitics, which is that, of course, the war is unwinnable for Ukraine. All it takes is a look at a map to know that the war is unwinnable for Ukraine. You don't have to know anything except size. There is no way Ukraine is going to win this war. That was obvious from minute one. You didn't need to know a lot. It took a modicum of common sense and a modicum of independent thought. That's all it took. And so few people, especially so few Democrats, who were the ones who fell for this for the most part, although Republican voters at the beginning of this were on board also, so few of these people had it in them to just think for themselves and tell themselves the obvious truth, which is that, of course, this was an unwinnable war from the beginning. And it just goes to show you, you don't have to know all that much to know that when a war breaks out, always trust the anti-war people, because the anti-war people are always proven right in the end. All you do in the interim is waste a lot of time, which wastes a lot of treasure and, most importantly, a lot of blood. This war was avoidable before it started. It was endable after it began. And you weren't allowed to talk like that. You weren't allowed to talk like that. The wave of censorship that occurred right after the war started, just like the wave of censorship that's occurring now that the Israel war has taken off, these things follow a similar life cycle, which is at the beginning, the establishment rushes to push a narrative, and now the narrative around the Israel war is crumbling even faster than the narrative around the Ukraine war. Right. The narrative around the Ukraine war crumbled faster than the narrative about the Libya war, faster that about the Iraq war, right? Luckily, the advent of the internet, for all of the damage it has caused to the social fabric, it has given ordinary people the means to communicate common sense truth. And the more that common sense truth gets out, the more people with common sense, which is most people, cannot help but see what is obvious to them. You can't hide such basic truths from everybody for all time. Eventually, the truth is going to come out. And now, like I said, almost 2 years into this horrific war. I mean, we're talking about all the carnage now in Gaza, as we should be, obviously. Bakhmut, 75,000 Ukrainians lost their lives in Bakhmut, and about 30,000 Russians. So just in that one city alone, over 100,000 dead. The human toll of this has been extraordinary and entirely avoidable if only people had listened to these voices that were marginalized from day one. And it takes almost 2 years for that common sense, just common sense, to find its way to Time magazine. 2 goddamn years.
Well, here's a couple of numbers I pulled up that told you everything that you needed to know. The population of Russia is 143.4 million. The population of Ukraine is 43.79 million. So what's going to happen in a war of attrition between those two countries? You don't have to be a genius. And that's setting aside relative industrial capacity between Russia and Ukraine. Just bodies to throw into the war. And that's one of the things this article got into also, that they don't have enough people. That the age of the soldiers now, the average age is in the low 40s.
Yep.
Because they wiped out all the young people. What did you think was going to happen if you assumed that Russia would not just give up, which anybody who knows anything about Russian history would have assumed, and anyone understanding what was at stake for Putin in this situation would have assumed, well, then a war of attrition obviously can only end one way, with the defeat of the Ukrainians.
Of course. And what did they think it was going to be? What did they think? Russia was going to surrender in 6 months? Like, did you not anticipate this was going to go on forever? Of course. That's how Russia's always fought throughout their history. And so, you know, it just shows how brainwashed he was, I think, from the outset.
Yeah. Having been through a few propaganda agogos in my lifetime now, it is just amazing to me that the same people fall for the same shit over and over and over again. These were the same people who cheered on the Iraq War. These are the same people who believed that Hillary was going to bring the Senate. You know, it's like, it doesn't matter how many times the narrative is false. And this is a good example of it. It's very Orwellian, the way you're supposed to believe something one day, and then the next day it goes down the memory hole and you're not allowed to think that anymore. That's what this is, and that's how it works. They're told what to think, they're programmed, and then when that is no longer tenable, they'll write articles as if they never said what they said yesterday, and they swallow it. And that prepares them to swallow the next narrative.
Please clap.